For this example, we're going to be going over items 7, 8, and 9, motion. We're going to use motion control. We're going to choose any subject that shows different types of motion, such as motion blur. We're going to stop the action, and we're going to work on our panning. Motion. Here we can see freezing motion, or freezing the action at 1/1000th, or between 1/1000 to 1/250. Remember to set your camera to shutter priority. If we wanted motion blur, we would go under 1/30 to as long as you like. And the basic techniques for photographing motion, you have your exposure, which is your shutter speed. You can also panning, zooming, and zooming with flash. Useful tips: use a tripod or a monopod. It'll help quite a bit, especially when you have a slow shutter speed at lower than 1/60. We're going to use a neutral density filter if it's too bright and sunny outside and we need to have a longer exposure. Neutral density filters are just like sunglasses for our camera. You can also bracket your exposure, which we're going to cover on the next video. So we're just going to go past that right now. You can use a shutter release cable, which will prevent camera shake. We want to turn on autofocus, but also turn off image stabilizer if you're using if your camera is on a tripod, because your camera thinks it's being handheld, but it's not, and so it's fighting you. So turn off image stabilizer and turn on autofocus. Autofocus button is usually in the front, on the side of your camera. Remember to look through the viewfinder and to think about where you want to photograph, where you want your subject to be before you set the shutter release button. So once again, freezing motion, 1/1000 to 250. If we want motion blur, 1/30th and longer. Here we can see the foreground is sharp, so we have, and the background is blurry. Here the foreground is blurry, but the background is sharp. Exposure. Once again, you really need to think about if you want to freeze motion or if you want a motion blur. Let's look at this table. The center area of the running man. If you want the running man to be sharp and in focus, set your camera to shutter priority 1/1000. If you want the man to be blurry, set it down to 1/30th or 1/15th of a second. Motion's relationship between f-stop and shutter speed. Here we can see an example from f22 to f1.4. At f22 at 3 seconds and at 1.8. Let's look at a quick close-up. f22 at 3 seconds. You can see how blurry the subject is, but compare that to f4 at 1/60. See how sharp the bulldog is and the rabbit compared to the f22 at 3 seconds. At 3 seconds, everything was blurry because they were moving up and down. Same thing with this bingo balls. At f22 at 1/2 to f2.8 at 1/125th of a second, you can see at the bottom, the hand is nice and sharp and the balls are sharp as well. But when we look at 1/2 of a second, how blurry the balls are, and so is the hand. Capturing motion. We want a foreground subject to be focused and the background out of focus, and the foreground is blurry and the background is sharp. So here, that table once more. And we're going to look here and reference 7 and 8, motion blur. We want the subject blurry, so at about 1/30th of a second. And we also have a table down at the bottom of the running dog. You could even go, it's just recommended at 1/30th. And then for, I'm sorry, I'm getting it scrambled. If you want to freeze motion, it's at 1/30th of a second. If you want the motion blur, oh man, let me clear this up. So at 1/500th of a second, you're going to have a sharp subject with that and a sharp background. And that would be freezing motion at 1/500. If you wanted to have a blurry subject and a sharp background, we do 1/30th of a second. So that would be the motion blur. The next one we're going to work on is panning. So panning is recommended about 1/15th or 1/30th of a second. You move in the same parallel length of your subject. So here the dog is moving from right to left. So we follow from right to left. Fast exposure. So here we can see the subject are off the ground and sharp, and the background is blurry. Same thing with her outfit is sharp, but the background is blurry. That's at 1/2000th of a second. Here at 1/800th of a second, we can see the background is blurry, and we can be capturing the subject off the ground. At 1/800th of a second, the subject is sharp and in focus, and the background is blurry. Here we saw this one earlier, 1/320th of a second. The background is blurry, the subject is sharp. Slow exposure. We can see here at 1/20th of a second, the handkerchiefs are blurry. At 1/50th of a second, we can see the horses are blurry. Panning. Remember, we pan from the direction of our subject, from right to left or left to right. Recommended 1/30th of a second. You have to play around because the lighting conditions could be slightly different. So here we're at 1/30th of a second, and the dog is sharp and the background is blurry. Now, the camera settings, you have it on shutter priority. You slow shutter speed, everything is blurry. You're going to speed up the shutter speed, and nothing is blurry. Then slow down the shutter speed. And you want to make sure you're on continuous focus mode on a Canon, or else a continuous focus mode on a Nikon, and else service mode on a Canon. You want to center autofocus point to the center subject and move in perfect sync. You want to fill the frame and shoot the subject directly in front of you in a continuous drive motion. So here we're at 1/60th of a second. One of the key tell signs of panning are parallel lines. And we can see here the parallel lines in the in the sky. Here we're at 1/60th of a second. And we can see the panning parallel lines in the background. At 1/60th of a second, once again panning, and we can see those parallel lines in the trees and in the sky. Here's a video. We're not going to watch it, but you can, go to Adorama TV and Google panning with the right video. Another way to capture motion is to zoom with a flash. So here, our setup down at the bottom, we have a fan, and we can flash, as you flash it at 15 seconds or 10 seconds, you can see like rays of light coming off from the flash. Here is a 30-second exposure at f/22 using the flash and zooming in and out at the same time. And when we go, if we look at examples, f/22 between 1.5 seconds all the way to 30 seconds. And this is a zoom lens. You zoom in and out and flash in and out, and that's what you get. So let's go back to that. So flashing and zooming in. But this is not part of the requirement, so we don't have to worry about that. That'll be another assignment